My name is Taylor Moore. I'm 38 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington. I work in the finance department of a tech company that makes software for automating accounting. Sounds boring? Maybe. But I've always had a talent for bringing order to chaos, especially in other people's numbers. In life, I tried to bring order too, for a long time for two people. My husband's name is Ryan. He's a photographer, designer, director, writer, basically a little bit of everything. For the last 3 years, he's been finding himself. That's what he calls it. When we met, he freelanced, but back then he had a spark. He talked about his projects with such enthusiasm that I believed he was simply a genius no one understood yet. Then the pandemic hit. The projects disappeared. The enthusiasm too, but the habit of waking up at noon and discussing how capitalism destroys the soul remained. I kept working. I switched to remote work. I adjusted budgets. We bought a house in West Seattle, not the cheapest neighborhood. The mortgage is $3,200 a month. I pay it. Insurance, electricity bills, internet, property taxes, all on me. Groceries, gas, dog expenses, Hulu and HBO subscriptions, even his beloved Xbox Game Pass, guess who pays for all of it? Yes, that's right. But Ryan thought I was the problem. He didn't yell, he didn't smash plates, he just talked. You don't understand real life, Taylor. You live by the spreadsheet, by the plan. You don't know how to feel. Or, you're too serious. You have everything under control. You know, you're kind of a burden. Emotionally, mentally, even energetically. He said that one evening after I paid his $118 parking ticket downtown, he didn't even say thank you. I sat with my phone in my hands, staring at the bank notification, and heard him in the next room putting on some art house film. He loved movies about the meaning of life, and I spreadsheets with expenses. But no one makes movies about people who save others' lives just by paying their bills. He wasn't working. Sometimes he offered his services on Craigslist, but mostly he was meditating or re-evaluating. He had a favorite cafe table in Capitol Hill where he could sit for hours with his laptop saying he was working on an idea. In the evenings, he'd come and say, "I need some creative space. You're too controlling." You know what I did at those moments? I made him tea, with honey. I told myself, love requires patience. He's just going through a rough patch. I held on. I kept trying. I believed it was a phase, that he would find himself. Sometimes I told my friend Becca about these words. She'd ask, "He said you're a burden? Just like that?" I'd answer, "Well, not exactly a burden. He just means I'm pressuring him a little." But actually that's exactly what he said, burden. A word that stays in your chest like a stone. It sounds different when you hear it from someone whose rent you still pay, whose bills you cover, whose meals you make, whom you try to support. One day, he said, "You don't even know how to relax. Everything is planned out. That's why it's hard for you. You create the tension yourself. Everything has to be under control. It's boring, Taylor. It makes you sticky, sluggish, a burden." I was silent, as usual. I was used to putting out fires inside and paying the gas bill outside. Love requires patience, right? But no one told me how much love costs in dollars, how much patience costs, and how much you're willing to pay while being called something unnecessary just because you're stable. Reliable, predictable. They say, "You're too serious." But someone has to be serious. Someone has to take responsibility. Someone has to pay the bills. And maybe I realized this too late. Or maybe just in time. Because that night, when he said again, "You don't understand real life," I thought for the first time, have you ever tried to understand mine? Have you ever tried to put a number on how much your silence costs? I have. Not right away, of course. At first, I just lived with hope, with patience, with the illusion that if you're strong enough, you can endure almost anything. But silence is also a kind of deal, and its price often only becomes clear too late. When Ryan and I first started dating, he was different. Free, bright, with a slightly lazy but charming charisma. He said, "The system's got all of us by the throat, Taylor, but I want to breathe for real." It seemed fresh to me. I was all about spreadsheets, taxes, and annual reports. And he was a spark chaotic, but alive. He could be inspiring. He could look you in the eye and talk about things I hadn't thought about. The meaning of life, spiritual freedom, the beauty of silence. And then, time passed. The spark turned into smoke. He disappeared more and more. He could say, "I need time to think about myself," and then not show up at home for 2 or 3 days. I worried. I messaged. He didn't answer. Then he'd come back and say, "I just needed space," and that was it. I was silent again, because everyone has the right to their emotions. I paid for his Uber rides to those places where he thinks. I paid for his studio rent, where he supposedly worked on a project, $1,100 a month just so he'd have a place. I paid for his credit card, which he opened before me and never paid off. I paid for his mobile phone because without it, he can't negotiate. I even laughed when he joked, "You're my investor." But it wasn't a joke, it was reality, and it cost me $4,000, $5,000 a month. One day, I found out his Xbox Game Pass was renewed again. I can't remember the last time I bought anything for myself just like that without need or necessity. And he was playing for hours. When I asked about his projects, he said, "Inspiration doesn't work on a schedule, Taylor." And then social media. His posts. Photos from art cafes. Captions like, "Living how I want, not tied to the system. Do what you love and don't work a day in your life." Comments from his friends, "You're awesome, Ryan." Emojis, filters, freedom, rebel. And that same day, I'd get a message from the bank, "Monthly mortgage payment withdrawn from your Wells Fargo card." I saw Amazon purchases his, of course. Sportswear, wireless headphones, even a cold brew coffee kit. He lived how he wanted, and I paid. He bragged about freedom, and I counted whether we'd fit the quarterly budget. He said, "You just don't know how to be light. You're heavy, Taylor. Serious. A burden." And I was silent. Because it seemed like if I exploded, everything would fall apart, but maybe if I stayed quiet, it would pass? But with every new transaction, it felt like I was buying not a relationship, but humiliation. Every payment was a check signed by my fear of being alone. Every month was a subscription to the role of the woman who holds everything together while being seen as a burden. I started tracking expenses in a separate file. I called it silence.lsx, just out of curiosity. After 7 months, $28,642. That's how much patience cost me. And while he was posting on Instagram about freedom, I was calculating in Excel how many more months my salary would last. He lived as if freedom meant the right to do nothing. And I lived as if love meant the duty to pay. But inside me, something was cracking. Slowly. Almost unnoticed. Like an old pipe holding pressure for years. And then it starts to drip. And then it bursts. Only I didn't know yet that my burst had already begun. It was just silent. Like everything else. It was a typical Saturday. Evening, the smell of barbecue, my sister Leslie's backyard in Bellevue, just north of Seattle. The sky was clear, blankets draped over chairs, kids running around with ice cream, someone grilling corn. Everyone was here, everyone except him. Ryan showed up with a can of craft beer, as always a little late, wearing that look like, "I'm above all this." He hated these kinds of gatherings but knew if he didn't show up, Leslie would give me a questioning look. And we'd start arguing in the car again. At first, everything was fine. He joked around, talked some nonsense about NFTs, and I quietly checked work emails on my phone as usual. Then my nephew, a teenager interested in game development, came over. Ryan started talking about how he was consulting a couple of startups. That was kind of sweet, in a way. He was good with kids. I couldn't argue with that. But then, something happened that still won't leave my mind. My sister Leslie asked, "Ryan, how do you manage to keep such a balance with Taylor? You're so different." He took a sip of beer, leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "She's like an accountant with a remote control, convenient but boring." There was silence for a second. Then laughter. Everyone laughed. My sister even snorted. I smiled too, like it was really funny. I laughed, but at the same time, I felt something inside tighten. Not from the words. From the look. He didn't look at me after the joke. He looked at everyone else. He was proud of it. He was gauging their reaction. He felt cool. And I felt like furniture. I smiled until the evening ended. Until everyone left. Until we got in the car. On the way, I stayed silent. Ryan was listening to a podcast about male leadership and new archetypes. I stared out the window, thinking if even one sad song played on the radio, I would cry right there. But I didn't cry. I waited until he fell asleep at home. And then, in the car, in silence, with the heated seat on, I let myself break down. I cried, not from pain, from insult. Because everything he said wasn't a joke, it was the truth. He really thought so. That I was like an accountant, like a function. A remote control. Convenient, useful. But not interesting, not inspiring, not valuable. Convenient and boring. He didn't say reliable. Not smart. Not strong. He said boring. And suddenly I realized he didn't say it just in front of others. He said it every day, just in different words. When he laughed at my job. When he rolled his eyes hearing about reports. When he called me stressful just because I paid the bills on time. When he said he needed to go think, and I stayed alone in the kitchen with his dishes. I wiped away my tears. Opened my banking app. Wells Fargo. Checked the card. The balance was dropping. $143.72 for Amazon Prime. His order. $289 for studio rent. $63 for Uber Eats. $14.99 for Game Pass. $31.4 for his Spotify family subscription. I scrolled down and asked myself, who's paying my price? Not in dollars. In nerves, in sleepless nights, in tears. Who covers my exhaustion? Who pays for my fear of being alone? Who deposits my strength into the account? The answer was simple. No one. I cover all the bills. I pay for everything. I'm in debt. But that night something changed. That phrase, accountant with a remote control, didn't just hurt, it opened my eyes. That was the last transaction I made in that partnership. And for the first time, I wanted to hit the button to freeze all accounts. The next morning, I got up early, even too early. Ryan was still asleep, sprawled across my half of the bed. And I sat in the kitchen, with a cup of black coffee and my laptop open. I opened Excel. For the first time, not for work. For myself. Gray cells. An expense spreadsheet. I named the file, reality check.xlsx, and started calculating. Month after month. Category after category. The rent for the studio where he meditates and finds inspiration $1,150 a month. The food he orders because he can't eat broccoli $400. His share of our joint subscriptions $140. Gas, Uber, debts to friends, gadgets, new headphones, coffee shops, tickets to mindfulness seminars, $2,361 per month. On average. I multiplied it by 12. The number came out neat, $28,332. $28,000. A year of life with Ryan. A year of his soul searching. A year of me paying his bills and indulging his whims. And you know how much he contributed to the budget during that time? $0. Zero. Not a penny, not for gas, not even for a cup of coffee. Only words. Only promises. Only accusations. You don't relax. You control everything. You're too serious. You're boring. I looked at the total row and suddenly remembered a conversation with a friend from Chicago, Amanda, an economist, a real shark. 6 months ago, during my visit, she said something I didn't take seriously at the time. Taylor, if Ryan were a business, you would have shut him down long ago. I laughed then, but now, laughter felt out of place. Amanda was right. I invested in a person who not only gives no return but also insults the investor. He's not a partner, he's a loss. I'm not a wife, I'm a bank. Only without interest, without insurance, without gratitude. At that moment, I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity. All the feelings I'd had before anger, hurt, anxiety gave way to clarity. I'm not unhappy. I'm reevaluating assets. I opened another tab, named it Freeze Phase. Started listing what to cut off. His Spotify subscription. The studio lease in my name. His Uber wallet. Game Pass. Transfers to his Venmo. Credit card he sometimes tops up. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel anxious about money. I felt power. This isn't revenge, it's calculation. Cold, clear, calm. My version of spring financial freeze. Not because I'm cruel, but because I no longer want to pay for someone's laziness and arrogance. I looked at the clock. 7:43 a.m. Ryan was still asleep. And I was already awake. Truly awake. And I didn't have revenge on my mind. There was only one thought. You called me boring? Then watch how the boring accountant shuts your business down professionally. Monday. 6:59 a.m. I was already up, dressed, freshened up, brewed coffee. Today wasn't just any work day. Today was the day everything changes. I sat down at my laptop, opened my phone, put on my headphones, and dialed the bank. Hello, this is Taylor Reeves. I need to freeze all joint cards linked to my account. Yes, including the credit card. The operator was polite, too polite, as if sensing that on the other end was a lifeline, not just customer support. Within a couple of minutes, the cards were frozen. Next passwords. Gmail changed. iCloud changed. PayPal, Amazon, even Netflix, all on new logins. Passwords no longer Rayan Taylor Forever. Now Reboot 2025. Auto payments? Cancelled. The studio lease termination at the end of the month. His gym membership, which he's been starting next Monday for 9 months, cancelled. Spotify family? Sorry, no longer family. Netflix? Access denied. Xbox Game Pass? Game over. Coffee drips in the kitchen. A notification on my phone. Your Netflix account has been unlinked from Xbox One. I smile. Yes, it may seem petty, but in reality, it's a systemic dismantling. I'm not just switching off subscriptions, I'm switching myself on. 7:24 a.m. He wakes up, rumpled, hair a mess, wearing an old Burning Man t-shirt. Hey, what the hell? My Netflix isn't working. I look up from my computer, calm. I reviewed the budget. New financial plan. He squints. You cut off my subscriptions? And the cards? I take a sip of coffee, say in the same tone as if reading a weather forecast. Yes, everything that came from my accounts is now off. If you need anything, you're an adult. You'll manage. He blinks. Doesn't believe it. Looks like, for the first time in 3 years, something isn't going his way. Are you serious? That's cruel, Taylor. No, Ryan. Cruel is when one person pays for everything and the other acts like it's normal. This is fair. He paces the kitchen like a cornered cat. So what am I supposed to do now? I put my mug in the sink. Live within your means, or finally start earning. Good luck. And I leave for work. On foot, no Uber. No guilt. With calculation. Because I didn't just freeze his comfort. I unfroze myself from fear, dependency, and polite self-sacrifice. Monday, 7:45 a.m. The day has just begun. And I already feel. This is the start of me. When a person loses access to freebies, they first get angry, then they cry, and then they try to negotiate. For Ryan, it took exactly 3 days, but it all started with a bang. That very evening, he slammed the fridge door. Are you crazy? You think money is all that connects people? I looked at him calmly, no flare-ups. Money isn't everything, but when one gives everything and the other only takes, that's not a relationship anymore. That's exploitation. He went with the classic. You're trying to control me. You're always counting everything like an accountant. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't argue back. I just watched him desperately check the Uber app payment error. Open DoorDash. Payment failed. Open his Spotify family plan no longer available. He was like a teenager, left at home without Wi-Fi. The next morning he tried a new tactic. Did you forget we're family? I'm your husband. You loved me. Or was it all fake? He said it in a voice like he was acting in a cheap drama. I poured coffee, turned to him, and said, "You're not a partner. You're a user. I just canceled your subscription." He froze. Probably didn't expect to hear that from the quiet, convenient tailor. I need to think. I'm leaving for a couple of days. Okay, I answered. No emotion, no tears, just okay. He packed his backpack, slammed the door, and went to think. Before, I would have texted him, "Are you okay? When will you be back? We need to talk." But not this time. I didn't call. I didn't check his stories. I didn't try to guess who he was with. Because for the first time in years, I understood. I'm not his anchor. I'm not his ATM. And I'm definitely not his insurance against adult life. I just sat at the table, opened my laptop, pulled out my plans, long forgotten, dusty, but alive. That financial literacy project I kept putting off. That course I always wanted to take. That idea I thought, maybe someday. And now maybe became definitely will. I made myself coffee again and realized the house felt quieter, cleaner, richer, but only for me. And in that quietness, not loneliness, but freedom. When I got on the train to Vancouver, the only thing in my ears was, "Next stop, freedom." I didn't tell anyone about it. Not my mom, not my friends. This was my decision, my day, my life. For the first time in years, I was going somewhere not for a conference, not to someone's birthday, and not because Ryan needs to clear his head. I was going where I wanted to go. The weather was cloudy, but inside it was clear. I looked out the window and thought, how much I had paid not just with money. I paid with time, silence, myself. When I arrived, the first thing I did was go to Citizens Bank, opened a new account, only in my name. No, and Ryan Walsh. No auto payments, no joint cards. I even asked to remove the joint email notifications feature. I wanted peace even in my inbox. Then a meeting with a lawyer. I asked directly, if I decide to leave, can I keep my home and protect my savings? He nodded, looked through the documents, and said, "You've already done most of the work. You're not just ready, you're armed." That was the first day I felt my life was in my hands, not in someone's promises, not in expectations, but in my actions. And then a simple, almost funny moment. I saw a dress in a store window. Emerald green, flowing. Not budget, but not flashy either. Just beautiful. And I realized, I want it. For myself. Not for Ryan to say, wow, not for Instagram. Just because I want it. I went in, tried it on. Bought it. Without hesitation, without a mental shopping list, without maybe it's cheaper on Amazon? And you know what I did next? I deleted the shared Google Calendar. The one with all the notes, his interview, his deadline, remind about his car insurance payment. No more reminders, not for me, not for the system. I walked along the Vancouver waterfront, cold wind, coffee cup in hand, hair loose. Ryan used to say, "Why do you spend money on yourself? You should put that towards something useful." But now I knew. I am the useful thing. I am the value. And here's what really surprised me. Silence. No bank notifications. No messages like, "Where are you? Why did you cancel HBO? I'm short on gas money." No need to justify my desires. Silence isn't loneliness. It's the place where you hear the most important thing. Yourself. For the first time in years, I didn't feel emptiness. I felt space. Financial freedom is when you don't buy love. It's when you no longer pay for silence in your home because it has become your choice. He showed up in the morning. No warning, no call, no message, just at the doorstep. with a bouquet of daisies from Trader Joe's and the face of someone who's sure she'll forgive, like always. Taylor, I've thought it through. I overdid it. I was selfish. But you understand. You love me, right? His voice soft, almost pleading. But now I hear the falseness in it. Not remorse, fear. Not losing me, but losing access to my credit card. I stood in the doorway wearing a white t-shirt and jeans. The fresh Vancouver air was still inside me. I breathed differently, saw more clearly. I loved you, Ryan, for a long time, genuinely. But then I realized you didn't love me. You loved my account, my auto payments, my ability to keep everything in order while you find yourself. He froze, the smile slowly faded. You're angry, I get it, but you're not capable of just ending it like this. You're not that kind of person. His voice hardened, even sneered. You'll never do this forever. You're just angry. You'll blow over and everything will be like before. I silently picked up the thin white envelope from the kitchen table. This is from my lawyer's office. Inside, a signed divorce petition. I'm not blowing over, I woke up. He exhaled and took a step back. Are you serious? You've lost your mind? This is all about money? No, Ryan, this is about disrespect. About years when I was your bank, and you were my critic. About the words you tossed around lightly, like coins. Burden, boring, accountant with a remote. I'm just tired of paying for my own humiliation. He didn't look me in the eyes. The flowers in his hand wilted just like he did. So where do I go now? Home. To the place where you learn to be an adult, or to where you can blame someone else again. But not here. Here lives a woman now, not a sponsor. He left. No yelling, no door slamming, just slowly. With those same daisies I never took. When the door closed, I didn't cry. I boiled the kettle, opened my laptop, and deleted the last shared folder on Google Drive. This is how those who are no longer willing to be used leave Ender 5 and Ada. Not those who walk away. I recorded a video at night. Sitting on the floor in my pajamas, with a cup of mint tea and deafening silence around me. No, will you buy me this? No. I was just thinking. Just me and thoughts that had been brewing for years. My name is Taylor. I'm 38. I work in the finance department of a tech company in Seattle. For 3 years, I paid all the bills while my husband was finding himself. I paid for his game passes, Uber rides, sneakers, and therapy sessions where he complained about me. And then I froze everything. It wasn't revenge, it was freedom. And you know what I realized? Saying yes to everything isn't kindness. It's losing yourself. Since then, I've been learning to say no with respect for myself. The video was 2 minutes and 18 seconds long. I never planned to become an influencer. I just needed to get this off my chest. But by morning, TikTok exploded. 2 million views. 140,000 likes. 8,000 comments. And hundreds of messages from women. You spoke my pain. I felt like I was hearing myself. I was also the money bank, and stayed silent. Thank you. I thought I was the only one. I was invited to the podcast Money, Honey, and Power, hosted by 2 women from Brooklyn, former Wall Street financiers, who now help women regain control over their lives. I spoke like I was confessing. When you pay for everything, you don't just lose money, you lose your voice. You're still working, but no longer for your own freedom for someone else's laziness. After the episode, Claire, an editor at a business media outlet, messaged me. If you ever launch a finance course for women, I'm the first to sign up. And I thought, why not? I gathered everything I knew. How to tell the difference between partnership and parasitism. How to set up a budget that protects, rather than destroys. How to say no, clearly, calmly, and without guilt. The course was called Financial Boundaries for Women. Launch 10 a.m. By 3 p.m., sold out. 350 spots. Didn't even take 3 days. It wasn't just a course. It was my way of telling other women, you don't have to be the bank for someone else's adulthood. You don't have to sponsor someone who calls you boring. You don't have to put up with it just because you love. You can say no, and by doing so, save yourself. I was the one who stayed silent. Now I'm the one who speaks. And here's in response, thank you. Now I can say no too. I'm walking along the Seattle waterfront early morning when the city is just waking up. In my hand a cup of strong latte, and on my face a light, almost weightless smile. The wind plays with my hair, and around me the whisper of waves and the occasional footsteps of passers-by. Before, when Ryan called me a burden, I listened, stayed silent, and paid the bills. Paid for everything. The mortgage, insurance premiums, groceries, his loans, subscriptions, and even his empty promises. I thought this was love, patience, duty. But now I know. It wasn't love. It was just feeding someone else's laziness. And I stopped doing that. Stopped being his bank, his insurance, his financial life raft. Today I invest in myself, my time, energy, money, and dreams. Learning to set boundaries and keep promises to myself. Because no one cares about your well-being like you do. My journey wasn't easy. There were tears, fears, sleepless nights, and doubts. But I came out stronger, freer, more alive. And when I stand in front of an audience, whether it's a university, a conference, or an online course, I say one simple thing. You are not a burden. You are the foundation. Your value isn't in how much you pay, but in who you are. Now, my name is not just Taylor. It's the story of many women who have already taken the first step. Who stopped letting others set their price? Who chose freedom instead of fear? Who started living for themselves and by themselves? Behind the scenes, my final message plays. If someone tries to call you a burden, know this. It's their fear. Your power lies in being able to say no. You deserve to be first in your own life. And as long as you invest in yourself, you are already winning. The screen fades into credit shots from my lectures, smiles of students, messages from followers. The credits are accompanied by the words, Women in Finance, How Not to Pay for Someone Else's Ego. I take a sip of coffee, look out at the ocean, and feel, this is the beginning of a new chapter.